friends. Welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the television show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Eliot Parker. It's great to have you with us today. We are pleased to be joined on our program today by author Lynn Eldridge, and she's going to talk to us about her debut novel, Black Hill's Bounty, which is an excellent story of romance, an excellent story of mystery, an excellent story of intrigue, and we're delighted to have her here to talk about it. And Lynn Eldridge is a therapist by day, and she's a writer by night. Black Hill's Bounty is her first adventure into the literary world. Her next adventure, Remember the Passion, is due out in the summer of 2016. She lives in a neighborhood surrounded by family in wild, wonderful Charleston, West Virginia. And we're delighted to have Lynn with us here today to talk to us about this excellent book. So Lynn, welcome to Chapters. So nice to have you here.
Thank you, Eliot. It's very nice to be here.
So tell me a little bit about the setting of this book. It takes place in 1876 in the Dakota Territory. So where is that exactly, geographically speaking?
It would be in the Northwest, and it's in present-day South Dakota. It was the Dakota Territory back in 1876, and this story takes off in Deadwood, South Dakota, which was Deadwood, Dakota Territory back then, in the Number 10 Saloon, which is still there today.
Interesting. And I was going to ask you about that a little bit later about some of the landmarks that we see in the book. One of the things that's so interesting about this book is we have a bullet that is featured in this book.
Yes.
That sort of takes a circuitous route. Tell us a little bit about that bullet, who's involved with it, and what happens as a result.
Sure. Well, the hero in the book, who's named Bolton Rivers, he is... The first line in the book is aces and eights, the dead man's hand. And this thought goes through his head just as a real-life character, Crooked-Nosed Jack McCall, shoots Wild Bill Hickok in the back of the head. They had there's a couple of theories as to why McCall shot Hickok. But when Hickok is trying to pull his gun out of the holster, his gun shoots right into his heel. The trajectory of the bullet shoots into the hero's heel and lodges itself there. So that's the bullet actually has a straight shot into his heel, with Hickok trying to pull it out of his holster, but not being able to, of course, because it killed him. The bullet actually exited. So that's where it starts. And the hero falls on the floor, hits his head, and he's not sure when he comes to exactly what's happening.
Yeah, so when we see that early on in the book, he wakes up sort of in this fog of where am I and what's happened.
And all this confusion and mayhem is taking place, as it really did. I'm very historically accurate with my books. I always like to say, if I say it rained on March 2nd, 1836, for example, it rained. Mm-hmm. So I'm very historically accurate. And so people who were at this card table were really there, and so forth.
Very good. Excellent. So we meet a couple of really interesting characters that are tied into the story. One of them is Tansy. We meet her early on in the story. She's a peace officer. So what does that mean for her, and what are sort of her responsibilities here in this Dakota Territory, in the area in which the book takes place as a peace officer? What does she do, and what are sort of her responsibilities?
Well, actually, it's Bolton who's the peace officer, but they don't know that right away. But he's actually the one who was a peace officer. She is, it's rumored that he's a bounty hunter. And they find the lawman's badge in his vest pocket, I believe, and that's how they figure out that he was also a peace officer. And then the rumor is that he is this rather fearsome bounty hunter. Now, he can't dispute that his name's on this peace officer's badge, so he figures that must be true, but he's not sure about the bounty hunter piece. She, on the other hand, is actually on the run from a situation in Texas, and she assumes that he would not be in this godforsaken gulch of Deadwood unless he were looking for her. So she is very wary that he's after her. She had come into the Dakota Territory, and actually she owns the saloon next door to the famous Number 10 Saloon. So when all of this breaks loose next door, because her dad was a doctor and she had learned some of his techniques, she goes next door to see if she can help somebody who's been hurt. And that's how she comes into contact with the hero who's lying passed out on the floor.
And one of the things I thought that was so interesting in those scenes where Tansy is involved early on, and there is the recovery and getting the protagonist back to health and everything.
Right.
Everything was so accurate, and it seemed like it was just so as it should be for that time. So, how did you go about researching and looking for not just the treatment and recovery aspect of it, but for everything that we see taking place in this time period in 1876? Where did you go to find the information? What was it like researching all of that?
I almost always spend at least 2 months researching a story and making some notes about an outline. And for this story, I had gone to the library and actually pulled out about 20 different books that had to do with the Black Hills, with Wild Bill Hickok, with Calamity Jane, with Seth Bullock, the sheriff, and Isaac Brown ran on to him as the other sheriff, and what were the Badlands like, and that's the Badlands in Deadwood themselves, and who were the people who ran this town, who owned the newspaper, who owned the Pioneer drugstore. So I started putting together all the real people, Red Clark from the livery, and finding out who was steering Deadwood, who was the power behind Deadwood, because of course they had found the gold, and Al Swearingen came to town with the girls in the wagons, and so I narrowed down. I took these 20 books out of the library, checked them all out, as many as they'd let me. I took them home and narrowed them down to about 3 or 4 books, which then I took them back to the library, bought the 3 or 4 that I felt like I was going to use for the next. Typically one of these books takes me about a year to write, and I knew the library wasn't going to be that lenient. So I bought the 3 or 4 that I felt like would be the most helpful to me, and just constantly researched. Now, I originally started writing, back in the late 80s, 1988. And as I update now and put this book out, I can also Google. And it's amazing how, and rewarding how spot on my research back then was to today. So that was really, really rewarding and fun to find out.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. We talked to a lot of writers about that, and they say, if I'd had Google, or if I'd had Google Earth, or if I'd had all these things where I can research and find out what a place actually is without having to be there, I would have finished this book or this work a lot faster than I would have any other way. So I'm glad that you find that to be true too.
Oh yes.
I wanted to ask you about a quote in the book that I really thought was interesting, and this is about Bolt Rivers.
Okay.
And you write, so his name was Bolt Rivers, and he had secrets. Did everyone know what those secrets were except for him? And I thought when we learn about him and we see him early on in the novel, when we think about that quote, it really stands out to me, because he does have some secrets. And what does that quote? How does that quote tie in not only to Bolt Rivers as the character, but sort of what goes on plot-wise in the novel, that he does have secrets, and everybody seems to know a little bit about him, or a piece here and there, except he doesn't seem to know that they know.
Well, he's fairly infamous because of the bounty hunter. But he's also, you come to know him as famous, it's through his being the peace officer. And he is, and some of these people, you have to realize that back in Deadwood, they would come in and out of Deadwood from different sides. Like if they came in from one side, they could come in on the wagon train. If they came in from the north, they actually had to lower wagons down into the gulch. So they would come in from different places, whether they were going to be a prospector and they were going to dig for gold, pan for gold, mine for gold, whatever they were going to do. They would come in here from different parts of the country and have information. A lot of them might have had tangles with the law, so they knew of Bolt Rivers, and he was this bounty hunter. He went after the big bounties like Cole Younger, Jesse James. He would go after the high dollar people. And as it says in the book, some of them fled Deadwood when he showed up. Now, he had a mentor who was a real life marshal, because he's a U.S. Marshal. He's a peace officer, but he's a U.S. Marshal. He became a U.S. Marshal because he wanted to cross the state lines because he's looking for a serial killer. But you don't say serial killer in 1876 because that phrase wasn't coined until 1970 by the FBI. But he's looking for a killer who kills about the same time every year. So he's the U.S. Marshal that he's patterned after is Tom Smith, who was a well-known U.S. Marshal. And so as Bolt hears things from people who are coming in and out of the gulch, there's a couple of U.S. Marshals that come through the gulch, he starts to put together these things about himself until it finally all clicks in. So he's wondering how many more secrets, and are they going to be good, are they going to be bad? And eventually he puts it all together.
How do you, well, one of the interesting things about him too is how he's treated by the different people in Deadwood. Can you talk a little bit about that and how we see dynamics and not necessarily alliances form, but he is certain ways to certain characters and different ways to other characters. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how that makes him really a round character in the story
really
because
three-dimensional. Of that? Well, he has a sixth sense for, in his line of work, not only as a U.S. Marshal, but as a bounty hunter, he has got an uncanny sixth sense for who's afraid of him, and they fear him, and they wish he'd leave Deadwood, and those who are so happy that he's there, like Seth Bullock or Isaac Brown, who was the sheriff before. They're really happy he's there, and he dispatches Crazy Earl right off the bat, and his companions were, as soon as they see him, like, that's Bolt Rivers, a bounty hunter. And then there's ones who see him as Bolt Rivers, the U.S. Marshal, and they almost define their relationship with him by which side of the law they're on. Is he looking for them? Is he protecting them? And Tansy doesn't know which it is. She doesn't know if he's there and he's going to protect her, or if he's going to haul her in because she is pretty sure there's a wanted poster out on her, which we find out later in the book.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, too, about another conversation that pops up between Bolt and Tansy, and that's about him returning to New York, because there is an element of a different place and another environment other than Deadwood that pops up in his life and his story. And there's something about Tom. He says, Tom is your best friend who saved your life from the hatchet killer.
Right.
Which I read that line, and it really just kind of made me stop, and I thought, oh my, yeah, we're really going into some really good stuff now. So tell us a little bit about Tom. Tell us a little bit about that Hell Hatchet Killer story, device in the story, and what's going on there.
Well, Tom Kane, of course, was the U.S. Marshal, and New York City, and this sounds really modern, but New York City had a police department back in 1876. In fact, it was a few years before that, when maybe 40 years before that, they had a police department. So Bolt actually started in the New York City Police Department, and his family owns a shipyard and has business interests there. So they're just he recalls that they're just on a family picnic when this hatchet, Harless Parker, comes upon his family. It's his time to kill. He doesn't know that then, but he kills every year about that time, and he kills Bolt's family. And that all happened in New York. He is a New York City police officer, just like Tom Smith had started out to be and then went in to be a marshal. And so then he decides, well, if he's going to cross the state lines in looking for this hatchet killer, who's so difficult to find, you can imagine, they don't know how to find, they just have to track him back then on horseback. So he becomes the marshal then, so he can cross state lines and look for him. And that's Hatchet Harless Parker has been on killing for many years. And it takes him 10 years to find him, because he disappears after he kills. He disappears until that time again in the next year. So he's just become like a ghost in between. And by the time he kills, he's gone. So he's been really hard to find. And Tom Smith was the one who came onto the scene when Hatchet Parker had killed Bolt's family and shot and missed, but chased him off, and so in effect saved Bolt's life.
Interesting. I just I love how it all ties together, and I think that's something that's really a strength of this book, is that, you know, we have these things that have happened currently, that have happened slightly in the past, way back in the past,
Right.
but you bring it all together, and you bring all the characters together around the central tension of the story, which is looking for this killer, the serial killer. You mentioned that your book is historical fiction. As you got into this, what were some of the challenges? You talked about the research earlier and the research that you did. What were some of the other challenges you faced in writing this type of book, setting it in the genre of historical fiction?
Well, for example, I can remember about halfway through the book, I thought, gosh, things are moving along too smoothly. So I stopped and decided, okay, let's stop. I know where it's going to go, but it's getting there so fast. So one of my challenges was, let's see what was happening in history at this particular moment. Well, I found out that on a certain Sunday, the preacher Smith, who he'd usually do his street sermon, and Swill Barrel Johnny would go through the crowd and work the crowd, and Swill Barrel Johnny was a real guy. Preacher Smith was a real preacher. Well, Preacher Smith got killed on a Sunday, and they thought that maybe the Sioux Indians, they weren't sure. There was a lot of course, between Custer and the Last Stand was going on. Sitting Bull was on the run. Crazy Horse was on the run. They thought maybe some of the Sioux had killed Preacher Smith. Well, that was a glitch that I had to bring into the book and talk about. And then the other part was Bolton had been working with Isaac Brown, who was the sheriff. On the same Sunday, Sheriff Brown is murdered. So I had two murders pop up on the same Sunday, and that, as one of the lines is, Tansy asked Bolton, she says, what does this do to you trying to find Hatchet Harless Parker with some help from Isaac Brown? And Bolton's line is, well, Gimpy says it puts a gimp in my plan. So that was working there again, historical accuracy into the book and how that would have affected them. And suddenly any leads that he had from Isaac Brown, which we find out about later, there was one to find Hatchet Harless Parker there, because he's tracked him and he feels like he's pretty sure that he's in the Black Hills. Comes there on a hunch, but he's pretty sure that's where he hibernates. So it does put a gimp in his plan. I think what you mentioned a couple of minutes ago about you have all these different things in the book, and I think one of the talents of a good writer is in the beginning, first half of the book, or even the first three quarters, you can write anything, but the sign of a good author is, can that author tie it up in the end? And it's totally like, yes, that's exactly what should have happened, or that answered everything. That was exactly correct. And I think that that's really a good point, is you can write anything, but you better be able to wrap it up in the end, and it all makes sense and it all fits together right.
Absolutely, because you don't want to take a reader through a story where they've
No.
invested, so many hours or so many pages following a set of characters, and then get to the end and have those unresolved questions.
Absolutely.
Or have them think, these characters at the end didn't behave like they did at the beginning, or
Right.
whatever circumstances.
Right. What
were there.
happened here? What's the disconnect? So I think that, like you said, having everything resolved, whether it's with Hatchet Harless Parker and answering questions there, or the Texas rancher who's got a score to settle with Tansy, and it has to be addressed. Otherwise, you don't bring it up. So I think that's always something I strive to make sure that I do, and deliver effective and appropriate ending and get everything wrapped up.
So who are some writers that influence you? Who are some writers that inspired you to write, or whose work you still look at and think, that's what I want to be, or that's who I want to emulate in some way?
I'll tell you that I really like John Grisham as a current author. I really like Stephen King, neither of who write historical romance as far as I know. Back in the day, I used to read Sidney Sheldon, and actually was going through an antique store recently, picked up a book of his. It's about 25 years old. I was looking for the date of when he wrote it. I was already going to buy it, and happened to turn to the first page, and there was his signature. So that was really fun, because I read Rage of Angels so many years ago, and to find a book of his that was autographed. I have met Nora Roberts before, and I like her style of writing. I love Sandra Brown.
Me too. I love Sandra Brown.
Love Sandra Brown. She's one of my all-time favorites. I find a lot of times if I read, whether it's historical or contemporary romance, I tend to edit it in my head rather than enjoy it. So I typically will read John Grisham or Stephen King or James Patterson, and I do like Sandra Brown, and I'm reading The Doomsday Conspiracy by Sidney Sheldon from 25 years ago, and you'd be surprised how, other than that he doesn't have cell phones to mention, it really holds up. So that's, I think, is a good characteristic of a great writer too.
Absolutely. I know you've been involved in writing for a long time, but before Black Hills Bounty came about, and you've also been involved in creating a Romance Writers of America chapter in West Virginia, and you were past president, I think, for a couple of years. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started with that, and what are the benefits of someone who is maybe wanting to write in this genre, historical fiction, romance, or more mainstream contemporary romance? What are the benefits of being involved in an organization like that?
Well, I got involved because I had written a book called Bridges to Love, and I had a scene in my head, and it just went over and over and over again about a girl on the side of a riverbank, and it's dark, and there's a moon, and somebody screams in the forest, and she's got to hop in his canoe and get down the Missouri River, and I'm like, what is that? And I thought, well, I'll write it down, and maybe it'll go away. But when I wrote it down, I had the next scene and the next scene and the next scene. And pretty soon I had 1,000 pages. So I split that up into 2 books. About that same time, there was a newspaper article in the Gazette or Daily Mail about Rosalind Fox, and she was from South Charleston. Well, that was her pen name, and I did a little research and found out her real name, and looked in the white pages and called her up and said, hey, I'm a writer too, and I see that you write historical romance too. So I met her, and when I met her, she says, I've been looking for someone to start a chapter of Romance Writers of America. She says, I will be the treasurer, but I need for you to be the president. And so I thought, oh gosh. But we got a vice president, and we got a secretary, and we started that chapter of the Romance Writers of America here in Charleston, West Virginia. And we had it I was the president for several years, maybe 3 years. And I think an advantage is we found out, like we went to Harper's Ferry, and they have the big Romance Writers Conference in Harper's Ferry, or at least they used to when I first started. So we went to that conference 2 or 3 times, and met. That's where I met Nora Roberts, and she was jokingly telling me. I said, "Well, I've gotten a couple of rejection slips," and she laughed and she says, "A couple." She said, "Let me tell you, when you can paper your powder room in rejection slips," she says, then you've had a couple. So she said, that's really good. You need to keep writing. And I always remembered that and thought that was pretty funny. And Debbie Maycomer, I believe, was there, and lots of other authors would come there and either do a presentation or be part of the group that met. So it helps to, if you're going to be like you would be in any genre. Like with my therapy practice, you keep your CEUs and you go to the conferences that they have so that you're up to speed with your therapy practice, and you're want to do the same when you're an author. So you want to keep in touch with what's going on in your line of work.
Absolutely, absolutely. We mentioned at the beginning that you're working on a second book, Remember the Passion. So tell us a little bit about what that one's going to be about, and you mentioned that it'll be out in the summer of 2016.
Yes, that's my plan. Remember the Passion, I have about 8 books total, and of course, as you mentioned, Black Hills Bounty is my debut novel, and Alamo was probably, it's about the Alamo, and Remember the Passion was probably maybe the 4th or 5th book that I actually wrote. It takes place with, there again, I have some real characters woven into this story with my hero and heroine. The hero in Remember the Passion is Blaze Bowie, and he is a cousin of Jim Bowie. And he and his brother are just about to lose all of their land. They have farmland and timberland, and they're about to lose the whole thing to a dishonest banker. And their only hope of holding on to this land is to go to Texas, where they're pretty sure their distant cousin Jim Bowie is. And Jim Bowie in real life married a woman named Ursula, and her dad, who was from Mexico, had maps to the infamous Los San Saba silver mine, gold mines in Texas. So they take off to Texas to see if they can find Jim Bowie, and if he will share his secret of where these gold mines are in the Texas Hill Country. The heroine of the book is already out in Texas, and at this time they had a terrible cholera epidemic, so she has just lost her mom. So you realize she's got nothing. She's very poverty-stricken. And she's stuck there in San Antonio with a stepsister and a stepdad who were very good to her, but she's just lost her mom, and her dad is long gone. And one of the lines in that, when Blaze Bowie does meet up with Jim Bowie, and they are at a fandango, which was really happening, and Santa Ana is closing in on them, and here they were all at a fandango. And I thought, now if I made this up, people would say, oh, she's a woman, she doesn't know anything about war. They'd never do that. Oh, but they did. And they waited until Santa Ana marched closer and closer and closer. So one of the chapters in that ends with the heroine is Noel, and when Noel finds out that his last name is Bowie, she's done with him. And he doesn't know why. And then at one point he asked Jim if he knows. He says, yeah, I know. And so there's some history there as to why she's got a grudge against the Bowies. And as Blaze Bowie asked him, well, who is she? And Jim Bowie says, well, some people, it's rumored that she's the illegitimate daughter of Jean Lafitte, who was the pirate of the Gulf, 1836. So she, there's a lot of mystery about her, as well as the Bowie brothers, who are Blaze and Shade Bowie, who have come from Vidalia, Louisiana, where Jim and Resin Bowie and some of their family was from that area in Louisiana. And she's from right across the Mississippi River in Natchez, Mississippi. And of course there was the infamous Natchez Under the Hill, which was a clandestine pirate smuggling, one of the busiest ports on the Mississippi River for illegal trade.
Wow, oh, that sounds like a fantastic.
So that's kind of the takeoff there.
Book. That's great. I mean, that sounds like a terrific book, and look forward to that coming out in the summer of 2016. And we'll certainly have you back on Chapters to talk about it.
Me too. Thank you.
But in our closing moments, Lynn, if someone in our audience wants to get in contact with you, to talk to you about your work, or to talk to you about your writing, or to get involved in the Romance Writers of America West Virginia chapter, or to get a copy of Black Hills Bounty, how can they get in contact with you? Where can they get a copy of your book?
Well, certainly at Empire Books, it's available. It's also available on Amazon. It's also available through Kindle. And if they're always welcome to email me. I am at lynneldridge88@gmail.com. And I welcome them to get a hold of me.
Fantastic.
I'm on Facebook, and I have Lynn's Pen on Facebook also.
Oh, yes, that's very true.
Lynn's
Yes, you
Pen.
do. Lynn's Pen, which is very neat. So please, everybody should check that out anyway. Even,
I hope so.
Because it's a great site, and you've done a great job with it. But
Thank you.
Lynn Eldridge has been our guest today. We're talking to her about her debut collection, Black Hills Bounty, and as we mentioned at the beginning, has a little bit of everything, romance and mystery and intrigue and secrets and a lot going on.
Absolutely.
It's a terrific story. Congratulations to you, Lynn, on the book, and we certainly look forward to Remember the Passion when it comes out. And thanks for being a guest on Chapters, and best of luck in all your writing endeavors.
Oh, thank you, Eliot. My pleasure.
And we also want to take a moment to say thanks to Natalie Sheets and the staff and management of Empire Books and News for providing our on-site support and technical assistance today, and also giving us some enhanced set materials as we tape our broadcast today. So we appreciate that so very much. We encourage you to stop by Empire Books and News for all your reading needs. They also have the largest selection of magazines in the tri-state. So talk to Natalie and her staff. They can get you taken care of with whatever reading taste or desire that you have right here at Empire Books and News. And we also have many of the authors, editors, and publishers you've seen featured on Chapters have their works for sale here at Empire Books and News. So we encourage you to stop by and check that out. If you want to reach out to us here on the show, we've got all kinds of ways that you can do that. One of the primary ways to reach us is through email. Our email address is at the bottom of the screen right here, lp4@zoominternet.net. Please let us know your name and where you're writing from when you do send that correspondence. That's very helpful in terms of us being able to track that and also get back in touch with you. We also have a YouTube page through the Armstrong One Wire channel that you can go and check out all the previous episodes of Chapters. That address is here at the bottom of the screen as well, www.youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire. From there, click on the Chapters tab, and you can find over 75 author, editor, and publisher interviews from over 3+ years of episodes here on Chapters. We know many of you've done that. Many of you've left comments in the comments fields. We appreciate that so much, so please keep checking that out as well. And we're also available on Facebook now. All you need to do is go to Facebook and type in Chapters in the search field, and there you can see content not only from episodes that we've taped, but also interact with some of the viewers from Chapters, and we put a little, and sometimes some different content on the Facebook page that we don't put on the YouTube channel. So if you want to follow all things writing and authors and all things going on with Chapters, you can check us out on Facebook as well. And if you're looking for an opportunity to hear some writers and to showcase your talent as a writer, the Writers Can Read monthly event is held right here at Empire Books and News, the third Monday of each month from 7 until 8:30. It's free and open to the public. You can come and share not only some of the work that you might be working on or maybe has been completed, but also hear work from other writers as well. It's a great event, a lot of fun, and we encourage you to do that if that's something that you might be interested in. It's here at Empire Books and News, the third Monday of each month at the Writers Can Read event. So we hope you'll check that out and make that a part of your reading and writing experience. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.